This is Tom Fox. In this episode of the Hill Country Authors Podcast, I visit with children's author Marilyne Cizmich. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and today I have with me Marilyne Cizmich. As most of my audience knows, I am a first-time children's book author as of December 2022. Well, Marilyne is a multi-children's book author. So I recently saw some information about her, and I thought this would be great to have another children's author on the podcast. Marilyne, with that incredibly long-winded
Okay,
introduction, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
sure.
What was your professional background, or what is your professional background now?
I didn't start college till I was in my 40s. I was an artist and a muralist and a lot of things in California. I was married before. I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. And my background, I'm a Croatian, 100%. And my family, immigrant family, 100%. My grandparents, they all came from Croatia, different parts, but still. And that's where I was raised, was in California. And I married my high school sweetheart at that time. And I had 3 children. And that was my job. I wanted to stay home with my children, and I did. And it took a long while, but we didn't, as California was turning way back in the 70s. It was a place, my 2 oldest children are girls, and they were involved in a robbery, believe it or not, and that did it. We said, we cannot live in California in the city. We were living in Richmond, El Cerrito at the time. And we moved up to Santa Rosa. It was beautiful. And my husband had his own decorating shop. He was a decorator. And so I would, home decorator. And so I would paint and do murals in people's homes, sometimes, or businesses. But we still really weren't satisfied. We had a pretty good community. We went to church. But I decided, Don, his name is Don. Don, do you want to see the United States and see if we want to move somewhere else? And he said, sure. So we sold everything, and we had lots of things, the business, the homes. We put a lot in storage, and we bought an Airstream and a brand new pickup truck and took our 3 children. This was in 1975. And we took off with no plans except to see as much as we could of the United States, as well as Canada, a little bit of Canada and Mexico. And we did that. Took 10 months doing that. And then we were in El Paso. We had just been to Mexico. And I was sitting at a picnic table, and a newspaper came and hit my face, just as flying with the wind, nothing hard, just one newspaper. And I looked at it and I said, hey, Don, you want to go to Kerrville, wherever that is, and see a music festival, Rod Kennedy's music festival? Sure, let's go. He was a musician, also an artist. And so that's how we got to Kerrville. We did drive with our 3 kids, and it happened to be one of the floods. We didn't know what a flood was in the hill country. And we got stuck for 5 days in the mud out there at Rod Kennedy's. And we met lots of Texans. We weren't even going to come to Texas. That El Paso was our turning point. We decided we were going to go north, but that's how it worked to get to Kerrville. And we really got to know Texans because the people didn't come to the festival. All the roads were closed and things. So we kept on our trip. And when we got as far north as possible, way past Nova Scotia, up in Newfoundland, we said, we've got to get some decisions. Okay, everybody vote. We went down to Portland, Maine. We sat in a library, all 5 of us. What do you like the best? What do you like? We all wanted to go back to Texas. And I think it was because unemployment was wonderful, and it was opportunities, and it was a small town, and we thought the people were so nice. So we went back down here, and that's how we got to Kerrville, Texas. And so I worked for Herring Printing for a while as a typesetter. I didn't have any education. I had from a family of 6 kids, and only my oldest sister had gone to college. And so I thought I got a newspaper out, throwing a newspaper in the middle of the night. And you rolled your papers with each other right across from the library. There's a place under there we would go and roll our papers at 1 a.m. One night, I was looking up the Sid Peterson Hospital, and I said to Mr. Udy, he was my partner there. He rolled at the same time. And I said, Mr. Udy, I think it was winter. I think it's pretty dumb. We're out here in the cold. Why am I not working somewhere like over in that hospital there? And he said, well, you can work in the hospital. You can do anything you want. You're young. I was in my 40s. And I said, he was an old man and crippled. He had been in the railroad yards and been crippled by hit by a train, even on his job, saving a man. That's another story. So I said, yeah, I guess I could. So I found out how you go to college, and I went to Schreiner. I didn't know that I was going to go into nursing, but I talked to people about what could I be. I always wanted to be something. What could I be that I would be able to do when I'm old, and that I'd make a lot of money, and that I would help people? And I kept coming back to nursing. So I graduated from Schreiner along with my second daughter, who graduated from Schreiner. She went to Baylor, and then I went to UT Health Science Center and got a bachelor's degree. So while I thought I wanted to be, wasn't sure. But as soon as I took my clinical in school of nursing, I knew I wanted to be a school nurse because kids were my interest. I knew a lot about kids, and I liked kids better than adults. I just liked relating to kids. And so I finished that, and I got a job in Centerpoint. That was my first job as a school nurse. And then an opening came along for Ingram High School. So I applied for that and got it. There were 17 people that applied, and I got it. And so I was there for about 3 years, and I said, I learned what school nursing was and parents and families. And I said, I think I need a master's degree in something specific like child abuse. And I thought about starting that master's program. And I went over to San Antonio back, and I did. And then I found out there was a professor that was up in Alaska, that she was pretty famous for child abuse and domestic abuse. And I said, by this time, I was not married. And so I says, you guys want friends? You guys want to go on a trip to Alaska? I want to go see if I can meet this professor. It was summertime. And see if this is where I want to go to get a master's degree. So we all did go, rented a van, and my sister was already up there living in the village as a reading specialist, my big sister, and learned about Alaska. And she met us, and 6 of us went. We saw it. I did meet the professor, and I said, that's it. I'm going to go move to Alaska, come this semester, and get a master's degree in psychosocial nursing and a specialty. I didn't know that you had to write a thesis. And I didn't even know how to run a computer, let alone write a thesis. When I went to Schreiner, I didn't even know how to take a test and how to study. Nobody had done that in my family, even aunts, uncles, nobody had gone. I had to learn a lot of things at one time. So I did move up that fall and started my program, and it took 3 years, and it was in the 80s. And so computers were really new, and there was only one program, and it crashed 3 times. But I had a friend that helped me learn how to use the computer. You didn't even have a computer at home, by the way. You had to go to the university and work at the laboratory. So in case anything happened, you had assistance. So let's see, where were we? Okay, we were getting a master's degree, which I did get a master's degree. So then
Wait a minute. What did you write your thesis on?
Okay, yes, and she was my chair, the woman I'm telling you about. I wrote my thesis on, and it's still available, of course. I'm trying to think. It's for boys 9 to 12, the potential for domestic abuse and violence in boys 9 to 12. It was very specific, and all the factors, and it's this thick. And so, yeah, that was very difficult, but I knew that child abuse was my interest. So I did that, and I got a job with a big pay raise. They were at that time changing all the school nurses to have master's degree if possible. And I started at a junior high, but then I worked up there in Alaska 16 years as a school nurse. And I ended up in an elementary school with 500 students. Then might want to know how I got into writing. The last day of school, we always had a get together, not an alcoholic party, but a get together. School was over, and we all got together. What are you going to do this summer? So I lived only half a mile from the school where I was. And so I went home for lunch and came back and said, I was in the parking lot, and 3 of teacher aides were out there getting they had the cider and food and stuff. And what had happened, the box broke and they were picking up the glass. And I said, oh, I'm going back into the school. I said, I'll take all that mess. You guys go ahead and fix the food where you were going. So I picked up the box with two hands that had all the broken glass in it. And I opened the front door to school, the same door went in all the time. And I ended up on the floor. The box was underneath me. Both of my hands were under the box. And I was out. And I did scream for help. What our school was used as an after-school program. And so that last day of school, they were moving all the furniture out of their area. And somebody had pushed the rubber winter rug up so that when I opened the front door, my toes caught under that rubber rug and I went straight over with the box on top. I was on top of the box and it crushed both of my thumbs and it required 6 different surgeries, a year off at school. They had to do one hand at a time and they took the doctor a tendon out of my forearm there and you made a loop and drilled a hole and so I could function with both of my thumbs. But I had very strong doubts if I'd be able to do nursing. Like I knew I couldn't even do an IV bag or anything like that. So as I was getting well there, and it was a huge problem because it was a workman's comp case and all that went on years. So another story. So I said, as I was sitting home getting well, what can I do that I would be good at? I could write children's books. So I investigated and remember way back, like 40 years, there was a company that used to say, can you draw me? And then you'd say, okay, this did it for writing. That same institute, it's called Children's Writers Institute out in Connecticut. And so I said, okay, I can't type yet at all. So I had to learn how to do a voice activated typing program so I could do the course. So I started children's learning how to write for children with that institute, and I completed their complete course. And while I was a school nurse there, I knew that I still wasn't satisfied. I wanted to do more. And so I found out that you could apply for a sabbatical. And well, first of all, to go back one little paragraph. At the time, there was this church down at the bottom of our street. We lived on a dead end street. And we went there one Sunday because my daughter was visiting. She wanted to know what church we went to. I said, there's one down at the bottom here that plays songs that I know that they used to play in the church when we went to Santa Rosa. So sure enough, we went down there and there were visiting missionaries who had just come back from the Ukraine. And they asked if anybody was interested in going next summer to the Ukraine and handing out invitations. They were having the second, this was in the 80s, so that they were having the second evangelistic crusade, which they called them jubilees in the Ukraine. And they wanted people to hand out invitations. You had a translator. So I knew that's what I wanted to do. So long story short, I went to the Ukraine with 6 strangers that I didn't even know, didn't even go to that church. But I knew that's what I wanted to do next. And it was life-changing for me. That week in the Ukraine was a changing life. I saw a whole new aspect of life, people, the world, all in that week. And then the second week, I didn't even have a passport. I had to get a passport first. I'd never been anywhere other than our long trip. The second week, I was by myself and I went all over trains in Europe, Austria, Germany before I came home. I was pretty stuck on traveling. And I found out then when I went back to work in Alaska, that they had a sabbatical program that you could apply for a year. And that's what I did. And I was the first nurse ever to get a sabbatical approved for a year paid in the Ukraine. And I had made connections still with the people that I lived with. Each day you went and lived at a different house. So you got a different I had one house, but a different college kid. They were college kids that were learning English that were going to be teachers. So I had a different, it's not a transcriber, the person that's with you walking around that speaks. Translator. Yes, thank you. So I got to know a lot of college students. And so it had all that connection. So I went on my own. I got the sabbatical, went on my own. My husband would come every so many months, or I wouldn't leave. I'd come back, of course, in the summer. So that changed my life. And so I had a lot of experiences just with all of Ukraine. It was just so wonderful. People, it related to my background as Yugoslavian people with Slavic. And so I understood just everything. I didn't need to know the language. I felt like these were my relatives. And so I made a lot of connections. That's how I still was doing children's writing courses. And when I came home after that year, I decided that I wouldn't always be a school nurse. And my husband was working for the school district also as a teacher of first aid for all 2,000 teachers and this staff. That was his job. So we had the same schedule. So I knew that there were so many unique things that happened in Ukraine that I could make some great children's books. I figured that yet still have the value of the books. So I started out. What was most one of the this was my first book. It's called Sonia the Church Cat, and all of my stories. I have 3 books that I've written already. I have a 4th one, but I don't have a publisher anymore. They went out of business. They were in Oklahoma. But anyway, the first book I used from experience. I had a friend called Angelica, and she had become a new Christian. I went to an evangelical church there. Of course, it was all in Russian or Ukrainian, but doesn't matter. So I would go in the morning on Sunday to her apartment, pick her up with her daughter, who was 7, and we'd go to church. So one morning I came and I said, "Okay, ready to go." And she said, "Yeah, go get Sonia." Sonia was their cat. So she went out on the balcony and got Sonia, and she stuffed her in her purse. And I said, "Why are we taking the cat to church?" And she said, "Because," and very like this, she said, "We're new Christians now, and everybody has to do their job and give to God. And Sonia's going to go to church and kill all the rats and mice. And I'm going to leave her there." And so, sure enough, we did have rats and mice. The church was an old theater. All the evangelical churches there were about 3 in that. Here, I went to Kherson, by the way, which is on the news a lot. Kherson. It's on the south end of the Dnieper River. We took Sonia to church. And she left her there for a week, and the people would bring their cats to church to kill all the rats and mice. And so I use that as my first story to take off to show the values of giving without money. And let's see, and sharing and family and how resourceful the people were in everything they did, everything. And the second book I wrote, Sonia's in all the books, series of Sonia the cat. The second one was how Cora was the cow. This is little Olena, the girl. So my blue blanket with the patch on it is always in the books too. That's my carryover. And Sonia was not a pretty cat. Like I made Sonia black, but like my cat, which is Nancy at home, in actually she was in Alaska. So the cow book, which is the second one, I wanted to get people to know about the natural medicine that they use. The cow's horn breaks, and they put the plantain. So I got a little bit of, but I wanted the culture to be in it in a fun way for kids to learn about Ukraine, as well as the cat and the people, how wonderful they were, okay, and how resilient they were. So those are the kinds of values that I've used, Christian values, in all 4 of my books so far. So I bet you have a question. I stopped to breathe.
So, how or when did you get back to Kerrville?
Hey, so actually, I was able to go back to work, and I stayed for a couple of years, but I wasn't satisfied. But Snyder was ready to, husband, leave. And because we have a ranch here, we'd never gotten rid of our property here or anything in Texas. We just would come back a lot and spend time. So in 2004, we bought a brand new Volkswagen. We're the only one with that red Volkswagen in Kerrville. And we brought our cat and not a few things, a lot of things that we couldn't let go of in the van, and took, I think it was like a month to come back, and stopped at kids' places on the way. And so we came back in 2004. And I worked at the hospital a while and such as that. I really didn't want being retired at all. I guess I'm used to it now. And so I started, you want to know how I wrote the animal book, which I have,
Yep.
which is
Yes.
completely different. So this book, I was taking an advanced course in that same institute in Connecticut. And I had no idea. I paid for the course before I even found out that the course, the whole thing of the course was you had to write a chapter book for children and go through the process of getting a publisher and all that. So I figured, what do I know? And I knew my husband had raised and rescued animals his whole life. And so I figured we'd write a book on the animals, all his different animals. I had my source right in the house. And so that was what I used to write, was his experience. They're all true. All the stories in here are true. Very funny. A lot of them adventurous. His friend, he did most of these things, or with his. So that's how I ended up writing the animal book and a chapter book. I spent a year trying to get a publisher, and I did have the UT Tech. I was interested, they're small press, but they never did anything. So I said, okay, I'm getting older by the day here. I better do something. So I found out about writing my own book on Amazon. And that's how I ended up doing the animal book. It was myself, which self-published. I can't hear you.
So tell me about when you guys first went to the folk festival. It must have been 75 or 76.
It was 75.
That was one of the first ones. So what was that like back then?
I think it was the fourth one. It was very much in the beginning of his career. What happened was that we got in on the first day. And so that was before the actual flood came. So only the people that could come make it that first day, there were only, like, instead of hundreds or thousands of people, there were like maybe less than 100. All the vendors, musicians, but all the musicians played for just the few of us, because they had it. If you're an artist, you're going to do what you do best. And we spent every day, the kids would go with, our three kids were, because I have to go backwards. When we came next year in 76 to live here, the youngest one, my son, and my second daughter, they went to Notre Dame to start with. And Lisa, my oldest, went to Tivy as a ninth grader. And when we took them out of school for the year, I had smart kids, still do. They all three have college degrees and have a profession. I saw the value of that kind of late in life, but it doesn't matter. I still have a lot of life left. By the way, if somebody might want to know, I'm 86 and going on 87 in a couple months. And what I'm going to do this spring is I'm going to Croatia for the first time in my life. I know we still have relatives. This is a sad story, but how my father got here was the Nazis came through his village in Croatia when he was out with the goats with his brother. They lived in a rocky village, and they killed all of his family, all of them dead in the house. And he came back with his brother. And so within months, he was a teenager, older teenager. Within months, he and another cousin, stowed away on a ship to America and came. And that's how he came to America. And I looked at the manifests when I lived in Alaska, and he's not on the manifest, but he went through Ellis Island, became a citizen. He went all the way to, because he lived on the water and knew fishing and all that and animals, he went to San Francisco. He heard that was the place to go. So that's how he made a connection with my mother, who was also Croatian. So anyway, that's a sidestep, but I'm going to go there. Not that I have any relatives I don't even know about, but I want to see that country before I die. I want to see where I came from, because I had such a connection with Ukraine that I know there has to be something like that.
I will just say you are not the oldest author I have interviewed for this podcast.
Okay. Okay.
Marilyne, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time, but if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you to purchase some of your books, what would be the best way for them to do?
Yes. This book that I put on Amazon, the animal book, which is 15 chapters, I've had 6-year-olds could read this. It's a 5th grade level, but so that's about the animals, 15 chapters. And unfortunately, the 3 picture books, these are picture books, by the way, 32 pages of pictures and text. These about the Ukraine, I would want you to send me an email and I'll make connection with you. They're all, if you buy the book on Amazon, this one, it's $2 more than when I'm in person with someone. These are $10 each. of Sonia books. Okay, give me my email address. Write me, and we'll make a connection.
I'm going to put your email in the show notes, Marilyne. I wanted to
Okay.
thank you again for taking the time to visit with me.
I've really enjoyed it a lot. I forgot about how fun all the things I've done. Yeah, and interesting. And I appreciate your time.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Hill Country Authors Podcast. If you've ever thought about starting a podcast or like more information on why your business should have a podcast, I hope you will join us on March 3rd, that's Friday, March 3rd, for a workshop luncheon at the Kroc Center on why your business needs a podcast. You can get more information from the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network website. I hope you'll join us on Friday, March 3rd from 11:30 to 1 p.m.